Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. I'm Carolyn Glassman, Public Affairs Counselor of the U.S. Embassy in Manila. Thank you for tuning in today for our Google Hangout with Dr. Susan Brems, Mission Director for the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID in the Philippines. But first, here is our ambassador, Philip Goldberg, to welcome our viewers.
Thank you, Carolyn, and it's great to be with all of you. Magandang hapon. In my time as ambassador here in the Philippines, I've visited many of our USAID projects in so many communities, and I'm excited that our online viewers will have the opportunity today to learn more about these programs and to learn what USAID is all about. To put this in a bit of context, the U.S. Embassy in Manila is one of the biggest in the world, and the cooperation we have with the Philippine government, civil society, and the business community here is excellent across the board. I'm proud to head this effort and to see the wide range of work we do in numerous areas with our Filipino partners on so many issues. Among these, USAID plays a huge and prominent role. I think we're ready for some questions and answers with Dr. Brems. Time to turn things back to Carolyn and, of course, Dr. Brems. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Ambassador. As Ambassador Goldberg mentioned, Dr. Brems is here today to share some of her experiences about her time with USAID, as well as information about the many programs that USAID is currently implementing in the Philippines with the partnership of local organizations. Good afternoon, Susan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
You're quite welcome. Could you share with us a little bit about your background and tell us why you joined USAID?
Sure. I began working in development under USAID projects, and I became very impressed by the work the organization does. I like representing the US government overseas. I've always embraced learning other languages and learning about other cultures, and I think that USAID has a size to it as far as its financial resources and technical know-how to really make a difference in a lot of people's lives. So it's a fabulous career, and I've enjoyed it very much for 23 years now.
Well, thank you. Could you describe what USAID is and what some of your activities are here in the Philippines?
Sure. As the ambassador said, and as you said, Carolyn, it's the United States Agency for International Development. So we are part of the US government. And here in the Philippines, we're part of the US Embassy. We're the principal arm of the US government that channels technical and financial assistance to partner countries such as the Philippines and the citizens of those countries. There are other parts of the U.S. Embassy that also provide foreign assistance. So we are by no means the only part that does, but we do have a very, very large role.
Thank you. Which countries have you served in? And can you tell us a little bit about the difference in the development challenges that you've noticed here in the Philippines?
Yes, I spent a good number of years in Latin America. I was in Peru twice. For a number of years. I was in Bolivia, I've been in Brazil, and in Nicaragua. So those 4 countries in Latin America. And in sub-Saharan Africa, I have been in Angola and in Zambia. So that is 6, and this is the 7th country where I'm working with USAID. How do they differ? Well, of course, with Latin America and the Philippines, there's some similarity that you pick up from the Spanish heritage, but also quite different in many ways. I would say that the Philippines is much more advanced, certainly than sub-Saharan Africa, and in many ways more so than Latin America. So it's a different set of problems, and that's what's fascinating about being in the Foreign Service and working in various countries. The sets of challenges are always different. They're never the same. At the same time, you're able to transfer some things you've learned at the previous post. So it's a nice combination of some new things and some things that you've found over your time worth repeating, experiences that you can bring to bear.
And if you could mention, as you said, you've had a long career of over 20 years. Have your views of development differed during your tenure with USAID?
I would say probably most people would expect me to say yes in answer to that question, but I would rather say that some of the views that evolved early on in my career, I have found that in my ground truthing that they do hold true. And part of that was that I went back to school and did a graduate course after I'd been working in development for a number of years. And my assessment at that point in my career, about mid-career, was that we were very good in development in the technical solutions, but we were less good at being able to put these into place in a way that was congruent with the social and cultural context.
Mhm.
So on purpose, I studied public health and social cultural anthropology and social change and development to bring those three streams together. And in that way of thinking, it's never purely a technical problem and response, but one has to consider the history, the culture, how people view their lives. It's a type of philosophy that puts great faith in local knowledge and what everyday people can contribute to development and how they can be actors in their own development and not the sort of passive beneficiary that sometimes one hears about in development. People want to create their own lives. They want to make their lives better. So our role is much more of a facilitating one and really a subsidiary one.
Mhm.
It's not USAID acting on people, it's USAID supporting people to act for their own welfare.
And what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your job?
The rewarding aspect of my job, of course, is to see the results that we're able to get with our programs, and we'll talk a little bit about the various programs. It's also to work in an institution that represents the best in the American spirit of both humanitarian assistance when something happens like Super Typhoon Yolanda or Haiyan, and that works in the more long-term sustainable development. So USAID works on both of those aspects. And because we have resources, they're not infinite in resources, they're not gigantic, but they're not meager either. So we have the resources to make a difference. So that's very satisfying to know that you can think about designing a project that actually will be meaningful to a fair number of people.
And where is USAID active in the Philippines?
USAID is active in all of the three areas of the Philippines, in Luzon, in the Visayas, and in Mindanao. That doesn't mean that we're everywhere in the country, but it means that we are active all over the country in various aspects. For example, Eastern Visayas, we've had a gigantic program in the post-Yolanda recovery and reconstruction. The US government has invested some $143 million there. We're invested in a lot of different aspects, sari stores for women, housing, hospitals, clinics, schools, all types of reconstruction. That's one example there. In Mindanao, we're working with youth in many ways. We're working with out-of-school youth. We're working with university students. In Luzon, we're working with elementary students. So there are a variety of activities, and we can talk a little bit about the various technical areas in which we work.
Well, thank you. How do U.S. government programs help to address gender issues here in the Philippines?
Yes. Well, I'd like to start that answer by saying that for us, gender involves both boys and girls. It involves both men and women. And sometimes people think gender refers to programs exclusively for women, when actually gender is a social and a cultural construct that talks about how women and men relate to each other and how their varying roles, responsibilities, relations of power, and so on. So in some cases, girls deserve a little more attention than boys. And in some cases, boys deserve a little more attention than girls. And in some cases, women deserve a little more attention than men. And in some cases, men deserve a little more attention than women. Just to give an example, in a lot of the primary education, girls are actually outperforming boys. So we need to make sure that boys don't be left behind. And we need to give a special push to make sure boys continue in school and continue committed to that. And if you're talking about tuberculosis, and tuberculosis is a big problem in the Philippines and one in which we're very active, more men are affected by tuberculosis than are women. So you need to make sure that you're catching all the men who need the treatment, who need to be diagnosed and need to be treated. If you're talking about maternal health, obviously you're talking about women being the beneficiaries there. But we do that in a way that involves the whole family.
Mhm.
So it should be the father and the mother who are involved in prenatal care and an adequate birthing plan, in postnatal care, and in family planning if they choose to space their births.
You've mentioned just now maternal care. How does the U.S. government support the Philippines in terms of child health care among Filipinos?
Right. All right. We have a particular emphasis on the very, very young, neonatal. That's where a lot of the infant mortality takes place, is in the first weeks and first months. We have an emphasis on appropriate birthing plans because about, if I remember correctly, about 38% of births in the Philippines occur outside of facilities. And sometimes that's with a trained birth attendant, and sometimes that's with a traditional birth attendant. And there's a big difference between those two categories of personnel. So in that sense, we want to have a safe birth for every woman who's giving birth. We want a safe and an early start for children. We're active in programs for immunization, which is one of the most cost-effective ways to promote child health. Those are a few examples.
And you just talked earlier a little bit about gender and that USAID is engaging both men and women, girls and boys. Can you talk a little bit more about what gender means to you as an anthropologist and why is that important to development work?
It's important to development work because men and women, the two sexes that make up the world, are about 50-50. I think it's about 51% women and 49% men. And so, as our former Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton, has often said, no country can develop if you're leaving half of its population behind. So, women's empowerment is very important, not only for what they can contribute to their family, to their community, and to their country, but for their own self realization. If we are not helping women realize their potential, we are missing out on a very important part of development. And then that realization of their potential, no matter what field that is in, will help them be better family members, community members, and will help build the Philippines even more. So by gender, we mean taking a look at the balance of power between men and women in various aspects, whether that's in responsibilities in the home, responsibilities in the field, if it's an agricultural family, whether that is in childcare, whether that is in making decisions about healthcare, including family planning. We like to involve men so they understand family planning needs. We believe in healthy spacing and timing of pregnancy, that women and men in families should make their own decisions about uh, their reproductive family plan, whether that's 2 children or 12, but they should be able to have them safely and when they want to have them.
Could you talk a little bit about USAID's work in education here in the Philippines?
Yes, yes. In education, we're involved in 3 different ways, and that they're all very, very important. In the first instance, we're involved in early grade reading programs, and these are in support of the Department of Education.
Mhm.
And these involve the mother tongue language program that the Department of Education has instituted, as well as the new year of kindergarten that they've instituted. So we're very much focused on reading as the fundamental building block for a successful education and for a successful life. So we've decided as a strategy worldwide that USAID will prioritize early grade reading. Then we also have a program that focuses on science, technology, engineering, and math, what we call STEM in the United States, which focuses on research and focuses on making the Philippines stronger in its innovations, in its technology, in its research capability. There's so much talent in the Philippines. There are such fine institutions in the Philippines. Philippines has so much going for it in this regard. And so we are proud to partner with various institutions in the Philippines to try to strengthen that so that the Philippines can be the beneficiary of its own development by people who are very much involved in bringing innovations to the fore. And the third area that I mentioned a little bit earlier is the out of school youth. And there we're focused primarily in Mindanao with young people who have had to drop out of school, often for economic reasons, other reasons due to instability, and helping them to find a productive path in life.
Could you talk a little bit about some of the projects that you've engaged in terms of humanitarian assistance? You mentioned earlier about Typhoon Haiyan. It would be helpful to hear a little bit of some of the examples of the success stories that you've had in terms of partnering with the Philippine government in rebuilding.
Okay. Well, of course, as you know, the Philippines is very vulnerable to uh, shocks of that nature, earthquakes, weather and typhoons, other types of storms, and so on. And there, I would say we need to speak about the whole U.S. Government contribution, because usually when a disaster occurs, such as Haiyan, Yolanda, the military is a big part of the early response, as is USAID. But the military has the assets to get to a place quickly and to be a very, very strong partner. And then USAID will provide humanitarian assistance, and often this is in food, often this is in plastic sheeting for temporary housing. This can be in water and sanitation products for women and for children and for families, toothbrushes and the basics. And then we move into a recovery phase where there would be resources for rebuilding and for assessing damage and then rebuilding. And so this is where we've been very active in the Tacloban area and all of the Eastern Visayas in the aftermath of Haiyan Yolanda. This is a very strong part of USAID around the world, and a very, very important part.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. Could you talk a little bit today about Partnership for Growth?
Yes, yes. And there is the other aspect. When I said earlier that we have the humanitarian assistance arm, and we also have the sustainable development arm. So the Partnership for Growth is an agreement between our two governments, the US and the Philippines. It was signed in 2011. And under it, we coordinate to have a work plan that addresses the major constraints to growth. And these constraints were identified through a rigorous analysis. And then together, the Philippines and the US collaborate on addressing those constraints. And some of them dealt with the regulatory framework, some of them dealt with transparency and good governance, some of them dealt with low human capacity, and some of them dealt with infrastructure. So we've been very pleased over these 5 years. And in fact, we've been meeting to summarize and to take stock of the results that we've had. Under that Partnership of Growth, one of the primary activities is what we call the Cities Development Initiative. And in the Cities Development Initiative, we've selected first 3 cities and then an additional 3 cities where we concentrate work in these various streams, bringing together economic growth, education, health, and environment. And we haven't yet talked too much about our work in environment, so we'll talk about that before our time is up for sure. And those early cities were Batangas, and they were Iloilo, and our other cities are Tagbilaran and Zamboanga. Yes, Puerto Princesa. Yes, and so we're working in a concerted way in all of these cities. The one new project that we have that is moving forward to carry out the Cities Development Initiative is one that's called Strengthening Urban Resilience for Growth with Equity. And we say for a short name, SURGE. So it's nice because it gives that idea of propelling development forward, surging forward. And this is where we try to bring together these various different sectoral streams and concentrate them on the cities.
Did you want to talk a little bit then about the environment and your engagement in it?
Yes, yes. We have a large environment program, one of the largest ones for USAID, and major projects that deal with fisheries, which for me was a new area coming here to the Philippines. And so it's called EcoFish, and it's a very, very important project that works with the Philippine government in biodiversity, in conservation, and in sustainable management of fisheries. And the fishery industry is so central to the economy of the Philippines. We have another project that works on water, so water supply and infrastructure for water. We have another one that works on reforestation and biodiversity in that sense of the forests. And we also have one that works on energy. And of course, we're in the aftermath of the Conference of Parties 21 and the Worldwide Agreement to reduce greenhouse gases. So these activities very much play into that, and that's a big part of our activity.
Well, thank you. I hope that you've learned something about USAID's work here in the Philippines and the important role that it plays in facilitating the strong relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines. For more information and updates on the different programs and events of the Embassy, including USAID, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and Instagram. And again, I want to thank you, Susan, so much for your time and for all the work that you do. It's amazing the extent of the work of USAID here in the Philippines, and you're doing a tremendous job. And I wanted to thank you again, and I will see you around the embassy.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who works with us around the country. We're delighted to be partners with you.
Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great day.